In 2011, this influential leader, Muammar Gaddafi, was killed. But what many don't know is that just months earlier, he had accumulated more than 143 tons of gold. Why is this important? Because the gold was believed to be the foundation for a new currency plan that could potentially overthrow the dominance of the US dollar. So in this video, we'll uncover the secrets of Gaddafi's gold dinar and how the West panicked when the plan was exposed. And most mysteriously, how the disappearance of this gold has never been answered to this day. Muammar Gaddafi was born in 1942 in a poor Bedouin family in Sirte, a barren desert region in central Libya. His life was full of simplicity, and from an early age, he was familiar with tents, goats, and harsh, lifeless land. But from childhood, he already understood one thing: a hatred for Western colonialism. At the time, Libya was not fully independent. Although it was officially recognized as independent in 1951 under King Idris, the country remained heavily dependent on the West. Almost all of Libya's natural resources were controlled by foreign oil companies, which meant its oil wealth flowed out of the country while locals lived in poverty. Gaddafi, having grown up witnessing this injustice, grew angry at the widening gap. While studying at the University of Benghazi, he formed a group based on Arab nationalist ideology, inspired by Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser, who was known for his strong stance against Western imperialism. At just 27 years old, Gaddafi and a group of young military officers launched a bloodless coup. King Idris was overthrown and the monarchy in Libya came to an end. Gaddafi then declared the birth of a new republic, with himself as its leader. From that moment, everything began to change in Libya. Immediately, Gaddafi took over the foreign oil companies operating in the country. Libya, once fully controlled by Western corporations, now nationalized its oil. Under his rule, the oil profits were redirected back to the people. He also implemented bold social policies that shocked many third-world nations. These included free education, free healthcare, food subsidies, and citizens didn't even have to pay electricity bills. Newlywed couples were even given free homes. Libya, once known as a poor country, quickly rose to become one of the wealthiest nations in Africa. Living standards improved and literacy rates dropped drastically. But Gaddafi didn't stop there. He wanted more than just to develop Libya. From the beginning, Gaddafi believed Africa's true strength did not lie in its divided small nations, but in the unity of the continent. He was a fierce critic of the West, accusing Europe and the United States of continuing to colonize Africa through new means, via debt, currency, and control of oil. He went on to sponsor the African Union and proposed the idea of a United States of Africa. Gaddafi envisioned a continent with one government, one military, and one currency. On the international stage, Gaddafi often appeared in bizarre and controversial attire, sometimes in traditional garments, and he spoke with fiery, anti-Western rhetoric. As a result, the West viewed him as a dictator, but many African leaders saw him as a hero bold enough to challenge global powers. At this time, Gaddafi was building his image as the King of Kings of Africa. He channeled Libya's oil funds into developing schools, mosques, infrastructure, and other projects across the continent. But behind all these social projects and bold ambitions, Gaddafi had a far greater plan, one that went beyond Libya's borders. As we know, oil had made Libya extremely rich, but oil alone wasn't enough to change Africa's fate. As long as oil trade depended on the US dollar, Africa would remain tied to the West. And Gaddafi knew that the real weapon wasn't oil, it was gold. In the late 2000s, an IMF report revealed that Libya held around 143 tons of gold, and almost the same amount of silver. For an African nation, this was a massive stockpile, and Gaddafi didn't collect it just for Libya's savings. He had a plan to use it to create a new currency, the gold dinar. That's when Gaddafi became a real threat to Western nations. If the gold dinar was launched, African countries could begin trading oil and commodities using gold, not the US dollar. To the West, this was no small threat. It had the potential to shake the entire global financial system, which had long depended on the petrodollar. The same wealth that made Libya powerful became the reason the West began seeing Gaddafi as a major problem. And just as Libya reached peak stability and influence in Africa, Gaddafi stepped into the next phase. To Gaddafi, selling oil in dollars or euros was just another chain of modern colonialism. That was the heart of what we now call the petrodollar system. Since the 1970s, the world had been forced to accept the reality that oil had to be purchased using US dollars. This system ensured constant demand for the dollar. The United States could keep printing money without worry as the world needed it for energy trade. And it was this very system that Gaddafi sought to destroy. With 143 tons of gold and nearly equal silver reserves, Gaddafi planned to launch a new currency, what was then called the African gold dinar. The idea was simple but radical. African nations selling oil and other commodities must use gold instead of the dollar. Imagine if 50 African countries united under one gold-backed currency. They would no longer bow to the dollar or the euro. All global transactions with the continent would require real gold, not green paper printed in Washington. Clearly, this was a direct threat to the Western financial system. When this plan was later leaked to the West, it caused panic. In an email sent by Sidney Blumenthal to U.S. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, it was clearly stated that Gaddafi had amassed a large amount of gold and silver, enough to launch a new currency. The project was described as a serious threat to the stability of the CFA franc, the currency used by 14 African countries still under French control. French President at the time, Nicolas Sarkozy, was reportedly the most alarmed by this. If Gaddafi's gold dinar succeeded, France's influence in Africa would collapse completely. And the United States would also be affected, as the dollar's dominance in oil trade could vanish. In Washington, Gaddafi's plan was viewed as a direct threat to the petrodollar. If Africa fully shifted to gold, other countries might follow, such as Russia and China. The US knew that if the dollar's dominance fell, their entire system would collapse. The trillions in national debt would become unsustainable, and the ability to print money endlessly would end. At that point, Gaddafi was no longer just seen as a problematic dictator. He was seen as a threat to the global financial system that had to be stopped. Coincidentally, in the same year, the Middle East was rocked by a wave of uprisings known as the Arab Spring. In Tunisia and Egypt, longtime rulers fell overnight. And when the wave reached Libya, Western powers saw the perfect opportunity to act. Protests in Benghazi were quickly reported in Western media as a popular uprising against a dictator. The narrative was clear. Gaddafi was portrayed as a brutal leader attacking civilians with heavy weapons and fighter jets. Report after report painted a picture of Libya on the brink of genocide. On the global stage, this narrative increased diplomatic pressure on Libya. The US, UK, and France spoke loudly, urging the world not to stay silent. The UN Security Council then passed a resolution authorizing NATO to protect Libyan civilians. In reality, the airstrikes became a systematic campaign to dismantle Gaddafi's defenses. Critical infrastructure was destroyed, air defenses were neutralized, government communications were cut off, and each attack cleared the way for Western-backed armed groups. These airstrikes grew more aggressive by the day. Convoys believed to be carrying Gaddafi were continuously targeted. Reports showed NATO wasn't just hitting military assets, they were also attacking any location that could threaten Western success. In just a few months, Libya descended into utter chaos. The situation worsened when government troops fractured, allowing rebel groups to advance into Tripoli with NATO air support. Eventually, Gaddafi's final stronghold in Sirte fell. On October 20th, 2011, Muammar Gaddafi was found trying to flee Sirte when his convoy was targeted by an airstrike. In a desperate attempt to hide, he crawled into a concrete drainage pipe, but was later found and captured by armed rebels. Footage that spread worldwide showed the former King of Kings of Africa being dragged out, beaten, humiliated, and shot. His death not only ended over 4 decades of rule, but also closed the chapter on a plan that could have shaken the global financial system. Just hours after confirming Gaddafi's death, U.S. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton appeared in an interview. With a smile and a chuckle, she uttered a phrase that became symbolic of how the West celebrated the fall of a threat. "We came, we saw, he died." The words sounded casual, almost like a joke. But to geopolitical observers, the message was crystal clear. Anyone who dares challenge the Western-dominated financial system will end up like Gaddafi. However, Gaddafi's death only ended one chapter. There is still a massive question that has never been answered, and perhaps never will be. Where are the 143 tons of gold and silver that were once reported? According to France 24, in the final weeks of his rule, Gaddafi reportedly sold around 20% of this gold to finance the ongoing war. But over 100 tons should still remain. A report from Majala claims Libya's gold reserves only totaled about 116 tons after the war, leaving a discrepancy of several dozen tons never publicly explained. Some reports say the gold was seized by armed groups, then sold off to buy weapons and finance the civil war that continues to this day. Others allege the gold was secretly moved overseas. The most controversial theory suggests that the gold may have fallen into the hands of Western powers, quietly transferred to foreign banks to ensure it could never again be used to challenge the dollar. Some believe it disappeared into the black market, used to fund arms trading and militancy in the region. The truth is, no one really knows where the gold went. No official report nor international confirmation has ever resolved this mystery. What is certain is that Muammar Gaddafi was erased, along with Libya's future. The country remains shattered, plunged into endless civil war. And yet, the idea Gaddafi brought forward did not die with him. Today, more than a decade after his death, the world is once again talking about alternatives to the US dollar. Emerging powers like China, Russia, India, Brazil, and South Africa, the BRICS bloc, are planning trade mechanisms based on gold and a shared currency. What BRICS is attempting today to end dollar dominance was in fact proposed by Gaddafi years earlier. The only difference, he wanted to start it from Africa, with a gold dinar. To many observers, this proves that Gaddafi saw far ahead and understood that true power does not lie in weapons, but in the financial system.